Today we're going to be talking about a case that is a wild one for sure. We're going to be talking about the case of Amy Allwine. And honestly, I'm not going to tell you anything about the case to start with. I'm just going to get right into it and let this unfold. Let this case unfold in front of you. And as we get into the case, I think you'll see why I've decided to do it that way, because there's a lot of twists and turns in this case. And yeah, like I said, it's a wild one. So, Amy Allwine was born Amy Zoe in December of 1972 to parents Charles and Joanne Setz. She was the middle of their 3 children, so she had a very religious household. And they grew up in Minnesota in a very religious household. Her parents were Christian fundamentalists. They were members of the Worldwide Church of God. And this church followed the teachings of the Bible very literally and very strictly. And the Allwine family were very dedicated to their faith, so that kids were not allowed to take part in extracurricular activities at school. They weren't allowed to have any friends outside of the church. So Amy's time in Woodbury High School was pretty much limited to just going, attending classes, and then going home. The kids still had a very happy childhood. Amy had a lot of friends. She had a vibrant social life that revolved around the family's faith, so she had a lot of friends from church. She was a cheerleader for the church basketball team and would put a lot of time into choreographing dances for the cheer squad, which she loved doing. She went on to attend Ambassador College in Big Sandy, Texas in the early 90s, which is a 4-year liberal arts college run by the Worldwide Church of God with the motto of recapturing true values. And they say that they basically prepare youth for life and service in the church. Being from Minnesota, Amy really didn't know many people at the school, but she met a guy named Stephen Awad. They both worked in the IT department together. They both loved dancing, so whenever they were at a church social, they would choose each other as dance partners. And so they got to know each other that way and became very close, which was really nice for Amy's overall experience at the college, because Stephen had a pretty good group of friends there. He was from Spokane in Washington, and a bunch of his friends from his church youth group that all went to Ambassador College while they were attending college, the Worldwide Church of God. It split into different sects, and one of these sects was the United Church of God. So these two churches had similar values, but they did differ in some ways. The United Church of God is an evangelical congregation, and they believe in the second coming of Christ. And again, they adhere very strictly and very literally to the teachings of the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And while the Worldwide Church of God didn't, the United Church of God did embrace the internet as a means of spreading the word of the gospel, which was great for Stephen because he loved it. He loved computer science. He was kind of this nerdy guy, and Amy was this warm, wholesome girl, so they really balanced each other out well. So when they left college, Stephen moved to Amy's hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota, so that Amy could be near her family, because they were very close. They got married on the 11th of August, 1996, and Amy's father, Charles, placed Amy's hand into Stephen's and told him, "Take good care of my little girl." As you continued on in their faith together, they were both deeply committed to the church, and religion played a central part in their life. Together, they would attend church service every Saturday in St. Paul, arriving at 12:30 p.m., an hour before the service began, and they would stay for all of the activities afterwards. Staying right up until the evening, they didn't celebrate Christmas or Easter, as the church considered them to be pagan celebrations. But they did celebrate other events. They would travel to celebrate the church's Full Festival, which was held in different locations around the world. Every year they traveled extensively, serving congregations around the world and taking part in humanitarian efforts. And in spring of 2006, they were ordained as deacon and deaconess of the United Church of God. Stephen later rose to the rank of elder, and he would serve the church, counseling married couples. He was a preacher, and he would give sermons and would anoint those who fell ill as well. In 2007, they adopted that only child, a son named Joe. He was just 2 days old when Amy brought him home, and it was part of an open adoption. So they stayed in touch with his birth mother, who had chosen the old ones as they were unable to have children. And they were a very loving and affectionate couple, and they were very caring towards their father babies as well. They both very much wanted a child and a family, and so Jerry was so loved. One of Amy's friends, Jane Shop, said, quiet, when she talked about her son, her face changed from happy to happier, if that's possible. Joe became part of their traditions and their family. And that Friday night tradition that they had with Amy's family, every Friday night, they would go to her family's house, they would go to her parents' house, and they would have dinner together. Amy's mom, Joanne, would set out the good china. Her dad, Charles, would cook a beautiful meal for everybody, and Amy would bring the dessert, usually a strawberry pie, because that was her mom's favorite. And when Joe was old enough, she would take him and get him to help her pick out all of the perfect strawberries for the strawberry pie. It was all very sweet, and they really were the perfect family. Amy and Stephen had a great relationship. They pretty much spent all of their free time together. By 2011, they moved into a house in Cottage Grove in Minnesota. They lived at 110th Street, which is a semi-rural road with very large blocks of land. So they had a lot of land at their house. It was 28 acres. They lived in a prefab home, which was put on top of a basement, and it was very homey as well. They had fur from the dogs everywhere. They had a newfound land and an Australian shepherd, and there was unfinished Lego projects on the counter. Just a very lived-in, very long time. Stephen was working 2 jobs from the basement of the home, so he was working for Up to Next. He worked there as an IT technician, and then he also worked with Cigna, which is a health insurer. And then Amy had found her calling in dog training. She had always loved animals from childhood. So it was a really natural path for her to take. She started out by teaching for a few years at a local dog training school before starting her own business called Active Dog Sports Training. When they moved into the Cottage Grove house, she converted a large shed on the property to a dog training arena. It was honestly bigger than the house. She believed in a positive reinforcement training. She became a leader in the field of dog nurse work, and she would train dogs, just like in general. And then mostly she did training for dog agility trials and competitions. As the business had grown, she traveled around the country with friends to attend competitions and trials, which were judged up by the canine division of the police department and her Aussie shop. Ed also competed in some of these competitions and frequently won, so she had a lot of friends from her line of work and then also from the church. She was known for being this relentlessly positive, outgoing, sunny, wholesome woman. Her friends say she was never without a huge smile. Her friend Jane referred to her as, quote, the salt of the earth, and said, quote, she was always smiling. You could look in her eyes and just see. Good. She was described as friendly, loving, and sweet. She was never negative, never judgmental, never gossipy. Another family friend said, quote, she believed in people and helps them believe in themselves. Despite being deeply devoted to her faith, she never pushed it on anyone else. She was extremely empathetic, and part of that empathy was her ability to imagine how she would feel if someone elsewhere did to try and impose their faith on her. End of footnote. So some of her more casual acquaintances were actually surprised to find out that her religious beliefs ran so deep. But religion really was her priority in life. It was her #1 priority. She would never walk or attend any dog shows on a Saturday because that was her Sabbath day on the side. Amy and Stephen also organized social events and dances for the teens at their church, and they also ran a website called allone.net. And on this website, they posted about their lives, their travel. It was kind of like a blog, really. They posted about their family, they posted about their missionary work. It all had religious undertones. Of course, they had a list of songs that were appropriate to listen to. They wanted to show that you didn't just have to listen to Christian music. There were mainstream songs out there that you could listen to as well that didn't talk about things or didn't sing about things that weren't okay by that faith. So it was a list of songs that didn't sing about extramarital affairs, drugs, murder. They also had instructional dance videos, so they themselves filmed themselves dancing to show that you could dance without excessive touching. You can have fun without dressing or acting inappropriately, as one video where Amy is wearing hiking boots and khaki pants, and then Stephen is wearing a polo shirt and baggy jeans, and they're doing a line dance together to the song We Go Together. So everything is going really well for them. They're a happy family, they're a loving home. They are doing well in their respective careers. They are really well liked in the community. And then all of a sudden, on the 31st of May 2016, the FBI shows up at that home. Stephen was walking in the basement because he walked from home, and he has a knock at the door. When he answers the door, he's met by Special Agent Asha Silky from the FBI and Terry Raymond from the local Cottage Grove police station. They say they need to speak with Amy. She's not in any immediate danger, but it's really urgent. She's not home at the time. So they make arrangements for Amy to come and meet them at the Cottage Grove police station as soon as she can. When she arrives at the station, they take her to an interview room. And mind you, neither of them have any idea what's going on at this point. The FBI haven't given any inkling as to what they want to speak to them about. They're probably freaking out. They're just like regular people living regular lives. All of a sudden, the FBI shows up and wants to speak to Amy urgently. They sit down in an interview room and they explain to her that somebody who knew her travel schedule, somebody who knew her dead, and they were actually actively trying to have her killed. This person had paid money on the dark web to take out a hit on her. She was, shocked. She was shocked, to say the least. So a few months earlier, on the 15th of February 2016, a user with the account named Doug Day God reached out to the mafia on the dark web. Now, many of you might be in the same boat as me. Obviously, I had heard of the dark web before, but I didn't really know what that entailed. I knew it was obviously the sketchy stuff you can do on the internet. I knew it was the illegal things, illegal drugs, weapons, human trafficking, stolen identities, videos of murder and torture, illegal porn, illegal, very disturbing porn, hacking, hitmen, all of that kind of stuff. I knew that it was bad stuff, right? But I guess I just had never really thought positive. It's just like a term you hear, the dark web. What I didn't know is that it actually is like this whole other section of the internet. You have to download a system on your computer that will allow you to access these websites that you can't access on the regular internet. One of these websites on the dark web was Besser Mafia, which is kind of like Airtasker, but for hackers, and hitmen and freelance hitmen could advertise their services there. Their website was linked to the Albanian mafia as per that description on their site. But the website was run by a mysterious Romanian guy named Ura. So you contact Ura, he helps you find someone to kill whoever it is you want killed, and all of the payments are in Bitcoin so that it's all anonymous. That website description said, quote, "We are the Albanian mafia. We have members in each and every country. You want to kill someone or beat the shit out of them, we are the right guys." So February 15th, 2016, at best, a mafia gets a message from you. That Dog Day God, which says, quote, "I am looking to hire you for a hit, but what is the recommended way to convert cash to Bitcoin anonymously?" This season was worried that getting out a bunch of cash and putting it into Bitcoin might look a little bit suspicious to the authorities. That's the mafia there, ever helpful, gave the user a list of reasons that they could explain away the large cash withdrawals, such as gambling and purchasing goods and services. And then they also gave them the names of some Bitcoin traders that didn't need identification. So basically somebody that would exchange cash for Bitcoin, no questions asked. They also gave them a framework that they could use for blocking competitors who were deemed traitors, and that's it. How this would work is the user would go and meet up with a Bitcoiner, try to give them cash, and the trader would then transfer the Bitcoin equivalent amount of that cash from that in Bitcoin address into the user's Bitcoin address. And a Bitcoin address is a series of random letters and numbers, and you can go online and you can see how much Bitcoin has moved in and out of that address, but you can't see who was on either side of that transaction or who the address belongs to. Your Dr. Gott then replies to the mafia and says, quote, "The target will be traveling out of town to Moline, Illinois in March. What is the price in Bitcoin for a hit and ideally making it look like an accident?" They then went back and forth on prices. I usually started at $5,000, and this would be carried out by a low-level gang member wearing specifically a turtleneck and a handgun. Staging it as an accident would be an extra $4,000. They settled on $6,000 for a low-level gang member to wait at a predetermined location and hit me with the stolen car. Again. They went back and forth. A dog. They had a lot of questions and wanted to ensure at best the mafia was real. Was the real deal that the mafia responded to. All of that questions patiently. And eventually, when Dog Day Guard was satisfied, they sent a message saying, quote, "Okay, I did some research and everything that I read says you are real and can carry out what you say you can do. They say that best means trust. So please do not write that for reasons that are too personal and would give away my identity. I need this bitch dead, so please help me." They then submitted an order through the website online order form. They included a picture of Amy from a family vacation to Hawaii, and the details read, "Amy Allwine. She is about 5'6" and she looks about piece 200. Saturday night, in quotations, March 19th. She should be staying at La Quinta in Moline. Apple Sunday, in quotations, March 20th. She's supposed to be participating in a dog trial at Quad City Christian School. She should be driving a dog green Toyota Sienna minivan. I want her dead. That is a 13 bitcoins. If you can look like an accident, then you can have the rest. And for the messages they told from Best Mafia that Amy would have somebody with her at the time, but it was nobody that they cared about. That's a mafia told Dog Day. God, quiet on March 19th. Make sure you're surrounded by people most of the day or in public places where they have video surveillance. This way you ensure that nobody can ask you where you've been on March 19th, if you have a good alibi. They can't do anything else other than say it was an accident and close the case. Dog. It got responded, quote, "Thank you for the reminder. I'll make sure I have a good alibi. March 19th comes and goes and Amy is still alive." So Dog Day God contacts Best Mafia and says, quote, "I've not seen anything. Do you know if this is done by the mafia?" Replies, quiet. "No, not yet. The hitman has followed her, but he did not have the chance to do the hit yet. He needs to be in a position where he can hit the car to the drive door to make sure she dies." They then suggested that a sniper might be a better option, provided that nobody would suspect Doug Day. God, if Amy was obviously murdered. Doug DeGaulle responded and said, quote, "No, I would not be a suspect. I'm fine with whatever you think is best." That's the mafia assured them that a sniper had a 100% success rate, but that it would be an extra $6,000. Doug, that god didn't have the money at the time, so he decided not to go ahead with the sniper and to continue with the plan that they already had. However, Best the Mafia said there was no opportune time to ram Amy's car, so the hit did not go ahead. The next day the Mafia sent them a message saying, quote, "We don't usually ask this because we're not interested in the reason why people are killed. But if she's your wife or some family member, we can do it in your city as well, making it look like an accident or a robbery." Dr. God responded, quote, "Not my wife, but I was thinking the same thing. How much would it be to kill her at home and then burn the house so that they could not tell if anything was stolen or not? I'm not sure if they have anything worth stealing. This Thursday, I know she will be home between about 9 and noon Central Time." They then gave the Mafia Amy's address on 110th Street, as the Mafia agreed to the times, but said it would cost an extra 10 Bitcoin to do it this way, which at the time was equivalent to about $4,500. Doug DeGraw agreed to pay the extra money and deposited it the next day. They also gave the Mafia some more details on a schedule and said, quote, "Okay, I got some more details on a schedule. I'm trying to get as much as I can, with that being obvious. It looks like she will be home tomorrow from 12 to 1 p.m. and Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. Those are the only times I know about at the moment. Let me know the plan so I can be somewhere else in public. I know her husband has a big truck door, so I suspect that he has gas cans in the garage, but I don't know that for sure. She usually drives a Sienna, so if that's there, she should be home. Thursday comes and goes, and Amy hasn't been killed. That's a Mafia. Said that the hitman had trouble getting to the location, so they requested another time. Dog Day God responds, quote, "Yes, I do want it done, but I have to pretend to be our friend to get this information. And it's driving me crazy to be nice to her. I'm also afraid that if I dig for information too many more times, that it will look strange." They rescheduled for Monday, but this time the hitman, the best mafia assigned, was pulled over for a registration check, and because they were driving a stolen vehicle, they were taken into the police station for questioning and couldn't carry out the hit. At this point, Dog Day God starts getting pissed. They just want Amy dead, and so they send the mafia a message saying, quote, "I realize that things happen, but this bitch has torn my family apart by sleeping with my husband, who then left me and is stealing clients from my business. I've had to continue to act like a friend to get information, and I cannot do it anymore. I've gone out of my way to try and get you good information. I feel that I am at risk of being suspected if I ask too many more questions. You've had 3 good attempts at her. None of them have worked. I liked the idea of shooting on fire because I think it would look like a robbery and cover up. But I'm at the point that I do not care how it is done. I believe that if I go about my regular routine, that I won't be a suspect. If I stop asking questions and just act normal. If it's not done in some way by my boss, then I would like my money back. Does that sound like a tough time for you? I cannot get my herbs built up again like I did this weekend. I do not care about date or method. You have a picture and address so you can tell her or do whatever you need to do to get the job done. I ask that you only get her and not the dad or the kid, as the kid is a friend of our child, and I do not want to leave him orphan. I do know that she's going to take a trip to Atlanta the weekend of April 7 to 10, but I do not know the details. I also was passing by recently when they had the garage door open, and I was able to see that they have 3 5-gallon gas cans just outside the door from the house to the garage, and what looks like a propane tank as well. I'm not sure if any of them are full, but they're there. Thanks for your help with this. I need her out of my life so I can move on again." The 4th of May comes and goes, and Amy is still alive. So on the 20th of May, God Day, God sends Best Mafia a message saying, quote, "That's it. Your local guys suck. They cannot do simple things even when given plenty of time. I'll try again later with one of your prayers, but I'll need to save up for that. Can you give me a quote of what I would need to walk with a prayer, and then I will try and get a new order? Walked up in a couple of months. Until then, please refund my money." The mafia responded by telling Doug Day God that the website had actually been hacked, and unless they paid another 10 Bitcoin, they would hand all of their emails over to the police. This exchange was just 1 week before the FBI showed up at the old man's house to tell them about the attempted hit. Now, as it turned out, Best Mafia actually had been hacked back on the 25th of April 2016, and their entire database, including all their orders, numbers, addresses, photos, had all been dumped onto an online paste bin, revealing users that had paid tens of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin to have people killed all around the world. Amongst these orders was the hit on Amy, or 1, or the number 30312. That's a mafia and Doug the God had exchanged 147 messages back and forth with plans to murder Amy on a dozen different occasions. The FBI soon got a hold of this hack and the ordered numbers and began making contact with all of the intended victims named in the data dump, and of course visited the home of Stephen and Amy Allwine on the 31st of May 2016. Now, the reason the FBI told Stephen that Amy wasn't in any immediate danger during this visit is because, as it turns out, the mafia was a whole scam. None of it was real. It didn't actually have any ties to the mafia. He was taking money from people left and right to carry out hits, and then he wouldn't actually carry out the hits that he had been paid for. And nobody could do anything about it because they couldn't go to the police and say, "Hey, I paid to have somebody killed and they weren't killed." I mean, you got to give it to it's kind of a foolproof plan and nobody's getting hurt. Just bad people are losing a bunch of money. But the fact that Amy wasn't in any actual danger from the mafia didn't change the fact that somebody had actually paid to have her killed. Somebody with intimate knowledge about her, her schedule, and her daily routine. The person that wanted her dead also claimed that they had a competitor dog training business that Amy was stealing clients from and that Amy had slept with their husband. When the officers shared this information with Amy and Stephen, they were like, actually gobsmacked. Could not even believe it. Amy was adamant that she had never had an extramarital affair. She had never cheated on her husband, let alone slept with somebody else's husband. And not only that, but they couldn't think of one single person that would want Amy dead. They couldn't think of a single enemy, even somebody that just mildly disliked her. The whole situation was incredibly confusing for Amy Stephen, for the offices, and it was incredibly distressing for Amy because, imagine knowing that somebody out there has paid tens of thousands of dollars to have you killed, and you have no idea who someone out there has such a strong hatred for you. They have paid to have you married, and you don't even know who to be wary of. This is somebody who's in your life, somebody pretending to be your friend, according to the messages, and you have no idea who it could be. The only lead that the FBI had was that in one of Dr. God's messages, they mentioned that if Amy were to die, they would inherit her business. Her business was worth about $50,000 at this point. And with Stephen having really no interest in dogs, he had no idea how to train a dog, he had no interest in inheriting that business. They asked Amy if there was anybody that she worked with that was set to inherit anything or gain anything from her death. But there wasn't. She was friends with everybody that she worked with, and there was nobody that was set to gain anything business-wise. If she died at the request of the FBI, Amy and Stephen reluctantly put together a list of people they would be likely to hand the business over to if anything happened to Amy, as well as a list of Amy's colleagues, including her best friend Sharon and two other dog trainers, Gail and Kristen. Kristen was really the only person who had anything in common with any of the messages from Dr. God. She had helped Amy set up her computer network in her online presence. She looked after the old man's dogs when they were out of town. Her child also sometimes played with the old Wayne's child jar, which was something that Dog Day God had specified to in their messages. Amy was sure that was no relation, and when the three women were questioned, they were all just as genuinely confused and shocked as everybody else, and it was clear that none of them were involved. After ruling out her colleagues, the police requested Amy give them a list of every single person in her life. She gave them a list of over 100 people, including friends, family, clients, colleagues, members of our church, and the police started looking into them all discreetly. They were trying to find out who knew the most about Amy, who knew her daily schedule, her whereabouts when she went away, and where she went away to. They interviewed 4 of these people and pulled the credit reports of several others. But what they found is that Amy really didn't have an enemy in the world. She felt bad and felt guilty even giving names of people to the police because she knew that there was no way any of these people were involved. It also confirmed for police that there was no way that she was having or would ever have an extramarital affair with. That inquiry's going nowhere. Special Agent Silk. He gave Amy his business card and told her to contact him at any time. He also told the couple that they should invest in some home security until this is all sorted out. And from the outside, it looked like things were back to normal for the couple. They were spending time with family, they were doing church activities, they were working. Amy was dog training, she was going to dog competitions. Again, they didn't tell anybody about what was happening, not even Amy's parents, because Amy didn't want them to worry to anybody that did know what had happened, because police had questioned them. They really downplayed the seriousness of what was going on. The only people that Amy talked to about this was her best friend Sharon and her sister. And at one point she confided in her sister that she was devastated, that somebody thought that the world would be a better place without her in it, and that she didn't know who that person was. Well, everything seemed normal from the outside. Behind the scenes, Amy was really living in fear from this point on. It was like torment. Her sister said that even small things like going to the grocery store would spark intense anxiety for Amy because there was somebody out there who knew her daily routine, who knew where she lived, that wanted her dead. They installed an alarm system at the house. They got new cards on the garage door. They installed motion detectors and cameras at every single entry point in the house except for the back patio, because that's where the dogs roamed all day. That's why they came in and out of the house. So they would just be going off all the time and it would be super annoying. They were definitely more vigilant about their surroundings. In June of 2016, Amy actually called the police about a suspicious blue van that was parked at the end of their street. When police attended, they found that it was just somebody who walks nearby who had parked up to have a nap. But even unknown cars on their street would spark intense anxiety. For Amy, she was really living in fear at this time. She and Stephen owned a shotgun and 2 rifles. But Stephen went one step farther and applied for a permit to purchase a handgun for personal protection. He and Amy went shopping together to pick out this gun. And Amy chose a Springfield 9mm, which was kept in a gun vault safe underneath her side of the bed. And this safe would only open at the touch of Amy's fingerprints. Stephen was also sleeping with the shotgun under his side of the bed, and he had obtained a concealed carry permit for the 9mm handgun. He rarely used the concealed carry permit. There was one occasion that he did, and that was when Kristen asked him to help her set up a Wi-Fi security system. I guess after everything that had happened, they just weren't sure who they could trust. On that date nights, instead of going out to dinner or a movie, they went to the gun range, that they could learn to shoot their guns if they ever needed that. Her brother was also a keen shooter, so they often went out so that she could get some extra lessons from him as well. She was also in regular contact with special agents. She took him up on his offer to contact him at any time, and they had actually become friends. She would talk to him about her life, how she was feeling, what was going on with her, and they even met up on multiple occasions, with Stephen coming her to 2 of these meetings. I think it was really helpful for her to have somebody that she could actually talk to, because she wasn't telling anybody in her life about what was going on and how scared she really was about what was going on, because she didn't want to alarm anybody. And I think it was also a lot of reassurance just having regular contact with an FBI agent. On the 31st of July 2016, she contacted Agent Sulky in a panic because Dog Day God had reached out again. This time, they'd reached out in a very scary anonymous email, and they were now going by the name of Jane. When she logged into her emails that day, she saw the email from Jane that which read, quote, "Amy, your family is in danger. Last Sunday you received an email with the solution to this problem, and you've not done anything about it yet. Are you so selfish that you will put your family's lives at risk if you did not see the email? Then check your junk mail soon." She had no idea what email Jane was referring to, so as suggested, she checked her junk mail and she found another email from Jane from a few days earlier, which read, quote, "Amy, I still blame you for my life falling apart. By contrast, Jane was happy with her life, health. I do not know how a fat bitch like you got to my husband, but because of you he left and my life has become shit. I'm sending you this email because it looks like you already know about me. I see that you've put up a security system now, and I've been informed by people on the internet that the police were snooping around my earlier emails. I've been assured that the emails are untraceable and they won't find me, but I cannot attack you directly with them watching. Here's what's going to happen. Since I cannot get to you, I will come after everything else that you love. I know about your son, your husband, and your business, and thanks to the internet, I see you have a mother and a father in Woodbury, a brother in St. Paul, and a sister in Yardley. I've been busy researching topics on the internet, and I've found that if you inject water into the brake line, then your truck caused them to fail. What would happen if the brakes on your truck failed when your husband was holding a heavy load? I found how to blow up a gas tank made up and make it look like an accident. I know that the meter on your house and your business are on the east side, and the meter on your parents' house is on the south side. I'm still watching you and your family. While I didn't see your son this week, I saw last Friday that he was wearing a bright pink shirt. I see that you moved the RV. Here's how you can save your family. Commit suicide. If you do not, then you will slowly see things taken away from you. And each time you will know that you could have stopped it, which will eat you apart from the inside. By the time I'm done, you will want to end it anyway. So why not just do it now and save them? They then went on to list a bunch of different ways that she could end her own life, and continued on in the email to say, quote, "Remember, if you do not get it right the first time, then you will likely be committed for mental health issues, and you will lose your business and possibly your family. So, I would pick a reliable method. I think it's an easy choice. 1 life to save 6 lives. Your family does not need you, but you can save them. Do not tell anyone about this email, or this deal is off and I will come after your family. You've seen that the police are not able to track my early emails, but I was informed of them searching. They won't be able to track this event, but I will know if they look into it. Unless you're a heartless, selfish bitch, then I expect to see your obituary in the paper in the next couple of weeks." Amy confirmed that some of the information in this email was correct, such as the location of the Metas and the fact that her son had been wearing a bright pink shirt in the week earlier. Some of the information was incorrect, like the location of Amy's sister, but that's because her sister had moved. So at one point, this information must have been correct. Now, the FBI took this threat extremely seriously. Special Agent Silk noted that the email came from a disposable email service, making it anonymous and untraceable. They took all of Amy and Steven's electronics, their phones, and the computers, and they copied them, returned them a few days later, but found nothing. They revisited some of the people in the dog training world and checked their electronics as well, but again found nothing. I did reassure Amy that this email seemed like a de-escalation. They had gone from trying to hire someone to murder her to now trying to get her to end her own life. It didn't seem like this Jane would actually kill Amy themselves, and that's why they were trying to get her to end her own life. And that wasn't really a concern that Amy would end her own life. She had said as much to Agent Silk. Her family needed her. She would never do that to her son, and it was strictly against her religion. Now, although it seemed like the threat of a hitman had been diffused, Amy was still understandably scared for her life. And so a few weeks later, she decided to enroll in the 8-week Cottage Grove Citizens Police Academy, explaining on her application that she wanted to, quote, learn more about the police department, what it does, how it works, and what she can do to better support them as a citizen. Sergeant Gwen Monday said she wasn't aware of any of the other participants in the course, describing her relationship with the police as honest, frank, and patient with her, and what she was told herself. Throughout the course, they practiced shooting, they practiced getting fingerprints off of cocaine, and they also did a ride-along, where they would accompany one of the officers on their shifts. Naturally, Amy requested to accompany a canine officer on the ride-along, and she was so enthusiastic about exchanging tips on dog training and dog obedience that the officer actually let her accompany them for an extra hour or two at the end of the 8-week program. That participants in the course had a little graduation party, which Amy was of course involved in, while a Citizens Police Academy helped her feel more confident. At one point, she and her partner were driving home from St. Paul Branch to where they lived in the same neighborhood where the accident occurred. She was of course still feeling paranoid and afraid. The migraines that she had suffered on occasion all her life had become more frequent, and she was having trouble with her memory when she told her dog training classes. From the outside, everything seemed normal, but behind the scenes, she was terrified that somebody in that crowd wanted her dead. That dog day, God was amongst them, because that's what all of the signs pointed to. She couldn't help but feeling like she was being watched like a dog, that God was watching her, that they were attending her classes, that they were walking with her. Her sister was a huge support through all of this when her sister had gone off to college and was feeling a bit lonely. Amy had sent her letters every single day, and now that Amy was going through what she was going through, her sister returned the favor. In October of 2016, the Allwine family traveled to Germany to attend the United Church of God Fall Festival that they had every year in different locations around the world. And everybody around Amy said that this was the happiest and relaxed she had been in a really long time, likely because she was so far away from Cottage Grove and this threat that loomed over her. After returning to Cottage Grove, life carried on as usual on Saturday, the 12th of November. Amy, Stephen, and their son Joe went to church, where Pastor Brian Shaw recited the New Testament admonition against quiet, having eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin. The next day, on Sunday the 13th of November, Stephen woke up early, before 6 a.m. as usual, and went down to the basement to start working. He came upstairs at about noon to have lunch with Amy and Joe, and after lunch, Amy loved cooking, she loved baking. She had some leftover pumpkin from a dessert she had made earlier in the week, so she put the pumpkin into the slow cooker for dinner. Shortly after this, Amy started to feel really unwell. I'm really dizzy, and so she decided to go to the bedroom and lie down. Shortly after that, her father, Charles, came over to help install a dog door in the garage, and while he was there, he didn't see or speak to Amy Stephen and told him that she was feeling really unwell and she was in the bedroom resting, and he didn't want it to stop her. So he did his walk in the garage and he left. Within minutes of him leaving, he gets a call from Stephen asking him to come and pick up his grandson Joe because Amy was getting worse and he was getting really worried, so he wanted to take her to the hospital. Charles, of course, comes straight back. He picks up Joe, who's waiting outside for him, and Stephen goes inside to Amy's room, and she is really not looking good. She's lost a lot of color, she's really dizzy, her mouth is really dry, and he wants to take her to the hospital, but she insists it's fine. I'm feeling a bit better. I just need to lie down and sleep it off. She had a dog training class at 4:45 p.m. that day, which people started showing up at the house for at 4:30 p.m. But of course she was really not in a good way. So another dog trainer took over, leading that class in the arena in their backyard at around 5 to 5:15 p.m. Stephen goes to the bedroom to check on Amy, and she's kneeling by the bed at this point, so he assumes that she is praying. He tells her that he's going to pick Joe up from his grandparents' house. He gets gas on the way, and then on the way back home, he and Joe stop at a chain restaurant called Pulver's. And this is like a Sunday tradition of Dad's while Amy is doing a dog training class. Normally Joe has some kind of like gym thing or class on. So they would go to that and then they'd stop at Culver's on the way home, have a grilled cheese and some chicken tenders. When they got home later that night, Joe jumped out of the car and ran ahead to go and see his mom while Stephen unpacked the car, and while Stephen was in the mudroom removing his shoes, Joe comes up to him and says, "Why is Mummy lying on the floor?" When Stephen went to check on her, he found her lying on the floor, face up next to the bed, with a pool of blood around her head. The 9mm handgun was next to her left elbow, and that was a shell casing by her right foot. She was warm, but there was no pulse. He frantically calls 911 and tells them, "I think my wife has shot herself and there's blood all over 911 with the edges of emergency. I think my way there jumped over to herself." Looks like if she still had it by then, I don't know. He just got it. And she'd do it herself. I don't know. I just saw her in them. I can't tell where she's not. I don't know. Are you going to remarry across National Blood Cottage? Police officers arrived within minutes while Stephen was still on the phone and he and Joe were waiting for them inside the garage. One of the officers that attended the scene was Sergeant Gwen Martin, Amy's teacher from the Citizens Police Academy. And when she saw Amy's body lying on the floor, she just burst into tears. Amy was lying next to her neatly made bed. She was lying flat on her back, her arms out at the sides. It was a gunshot wound to her head. Blood pooled around her head, and the 9mm handgun was next to her left elbow. Her hands were undone, and her red sweater was pulled slightly up, exposing her stomach and her underwear. Another sergeant took over while Sergeant Martin returned to her squad car to regain her composure. And while she was in there, she decided to look at police calls made to the residents, which is when she discovered the threats made on Amy's life. In complete shock at the discovery, she immediately calls Detective Sergeant Randy McAllister, who led investigations at Cotgrave. He was a little confused as to why she would be calling a detective for a suicide because, although equally as tragic, they don't normally need a detective to attend the scene because it is pretty straightforward. Yes, pretty open, closed case, as Gwen tried to tell him and explain why they would need a detective there. She just choked up. She just could not get the words out. And so she handed the phone to her partner, who explained that the victim was Amy, all within the same woman who had received the dark web threats on her life. Detective McAllister had actually been aware of Amy's case since back in May because the FBI had contacted him about it, and he had assigned Detective Terry Raymond to go with Special Agent Sulky to inform Amy of the threat. So he immediately gets dressed, he goes straight to the crime scene, and he's looking out for anything that might be out of the ordinary in a suicide case. The first thing he notices when he gets to the old Wayne home is the smell of pumpkin emanating through the house, and he notes that it's not typical of somebody to start cooking dinner right before they end there in life. And that wasn't the only thing that didn't make sense about the scene. That was blood on both the inside and the outside of the bedroom door. The floor just outside of the bedroom door also had this weird film over it as if it had been cleaned, which was at odds with the rest of the house, where you could find dog hair everywhere. So this area outside the bedroom door was the only part of the house that was spotless. In addition to the pool of blood underneath Amy's head, there were also these weird drops of blood to the left of her that didn't make any sense in relation to the scene, because the only way those drops of blood could have got there is if they dripped off something that was being held in the air above that area. Blood from Amy's mouth and nose had also dripped down the left side of her face, despite the fact that she was facing directly up towards the ceiling. This indicated that at one point she had been on her side, and somebody had then moved her body to face directly up towards ceiling. Stephen had contacted Amy's parents to tell them what had happened. And so at this point they showed up at the house along with Amy's brother. And when they were talking to Detective McAllister, they did mention that Amy was right-handed. And this struck Detective McAllister as weird because the gun was found next to Amy's elbow, meaning she would have shot herself with her left hand, which didn't make any sense. They also told him, and Stephen also told him, that Amy was happy despite everything that was going on in her life. She was happy. She would never leave her family. She adored her family. They were her entire life. So with all of these things that don't quite make sense in a suicide case, Detective McAllister just knows something is not quite right here. And he wants a second set of eyes to look at everything. So he goes to State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and they send an agent out to the scene. As he waited for that agent to arrive, he got another officer to take Stephen and Joe to the station for questioning, and they also took their fingerprints, their DNA, and they tested for gunshot residue. For the next 3 days, investigators combed the crime scene. Police officers went door to door in the area asking neighbors if they had seen or heard anything weird from that Sunday. They also questioned the people that were on the old man's property at the dog training session. There were 5 students, that one instructor. The class went from 445 to 545, and they said that towards the end of that class, they heard this loud screeching noise. It was like screeching tires, as if somebody was driving away in a hurry. It was a really loud noise. It startled everybody in the class, and they all thought it was a bit strange. And there was also a neighbor on the street who corroborated having heard this noise. There was another neighbor who also said that on the Sunday afternoon, he noticed that the old ones had that chimney burning. That was like smoke coming from that chimney, which he thought it was weird, because although it was November in Minnesota, it was a really warm day. He was outside wearing a t-shirt. Nobody else on the street had their chimneys burning, so he thought it was strange, but he didn't think too much of it at the time. At the scene, they bagged Amy's hands so they could test for gunshot residue, and they prepared her body for autopsy. They spread luminol on the floors, which showed that there had been a significant amount of blood in that hallway outside the bedroom, which someone had actually stepped in, and tracked bloody footprints up and down the hallway, from the bedroom to the bathroom to the laundry. And then they had attempted to clean this up. This kind of solidified that foul play was involved, and that Amy hadn't ended her own life. It was clear that she was murdered, likely in that hallway. The killer that moved her body into the bedroom cleaned up the excess blood and staged the scene. About 2 weeks after Amy's death, as Stephen was asked to come in for another interview, and he brought his attorney with him and his pastor, Brian Shaw, who was asked to wait outside during the interview by Stephen. I don't even know why he brought his pastor if he wasn't even going to let him into the interview room at all, and he had just had to wait outside the whole time, considering the interview went for 2 hours as well. And he's like, yeah, mate, you can't come in, but please come with me. I don't understand it. Anyway, during the 2-hour interview, Stephen is very quiet. He's very soft-spoken. The only time he kind of packs up is when he talks about church and his religion. He sits up straight off, he projects his voicemail, he was very cooperative throughout the whole interview. He answered all of the detectives' questions, but he couldn't explain why any blood would have been in that hallway. Nobody in the family had injured himself in that area that required a cleanup of blood that he knew of, so it had to have been a result of the murder. He said that he had never even heard of the dark web, the FBI's visit in May. He had no idea who would want to harm Amy, but some of the signs pointed to fellow dog trainer Kristen. He had no idea where Amy's dog Trust took her, but Kristen did. She had actually been the one to make arrangements for the trip to Moline, Illinois, the same trip that Dog Day God knew about. They questioned him again, of course, about the allegations that Amy was having an affair. And he said there was absolutely no way that she had ever had an affair, that she had ever cheated on him. And then he proceeded to drop an absolute bomb on the detectives and said that it was actually him who was having the affair. Mr. Religion, Mr. Marriage Counselor at the charge, was the one having the affair. He met a woman named Michelle Woodard on Ashley Madison, of all places. You just don't know what Ashley Madison is. And about all of that drama. You should definitely go and watch the Netflix documentary on it. It's quite good. I just remember being a kid and that whole scandal happening with Ashley Madison. Basically, it's a dating site, but for married people to have affairs. Their slogan was literally "Live Short, Have an Affair." In 2015, that whole website got hacked, and all of the people that were having affairs on that all got posted online. So that was I remember that being a site that you could go on and you could type in somebody's name to see if they were on the website. It was crazy. It was a crazy time. You guys should definitely watch the documentary if you haven't heard of it before. Anyway, so he has that Ashley Madison at one of his marriage counseling sessions, and he decides to hop on that, see what it's all about. He goes on another date. Before he met Michelle, he took a woman out to dinner. After they ate dinner, she used the old "gotta go to the bathroom," and then poof, she was gone. Never saw her again. After that, he matches with Michelle, the small, petite, blonde woman in her 40s. She's married, but she's in an open marriage. They start seeing each other in October of 2015, and their first date was very, very romantic. He accompanied her to a doctor's appointment. After this, they started meeting out for coffee, lunch, dinner, obviously meeting up just for hookups, which often happened at Michelle's house. They usually met up while Amy was away for dog trials and competitions. And on 2 occasions, Stephen actually took Michelle with him on black trips. Michelle knew all about Amy, by the way. Stephen would talk about how I would complain about her a lot, would complain that she doesn't spend enough time with her family, that she's walking too much, and he never spoke about his faith. Michelle actually found out that he was religious when she Googled him and found out that he was a preacher at the United Church of God, and she was shocked by that. By February 2016, their relationship started to dwindle. They were still meeting up here and there, but it was a lot more casual. They did still meet up for Stephen's birthday in March, which he was actually late for because he had locked his keys in his car. The last time they actually physically slept together was in April. Amy was out of town for work, and so he invited her over and showed her around the house. They did meet up again just for lunch in September, and when they met up in September, he actually confided in her about everything that was going on with the dark web threats against Amy's life, from somebody that wanted to inherit her business, to which Michelle responded, "Who would kill somebody over a $50,000 business?" So he tells the police all about this affair, and he refers to it as a fling from a couple of years ago. He said it started out as a friendship because Michelle was going through a hard time. And he also said that because he was a minister, it sort of started out more like counseling, which didn't make any sense because she didn't even know that he was religious. And also a friendship from Ashley Madison. Yeah, right. I don't know who this guy thinks he's fooling. He insisted that none of this had anything to do with the case, and that Michelle had nothing to do with this. He said, "Let's not tell my pastor. Let's not tell Amy's parents," because he and Joe were actually in the process of moving into Amy's parents' house so that they could all be there for one another. And also because Amy's parents didn't want him and Joe to have to live in the place where this tragedy had occurred. He insisted that police continue looking into Kristen because she was the only one that had any similarities with Dr. Gutt. So they bring her in for another interview, and as it turns out, she was in Oklahoma for a dog show, which they were able to verify. So she had an airtight alibi. There was no way that Kristen was involved. Shortly after that interview, so just over 2 weeks after Amy's death, the FBI sent the Cottage Grove Police Department Amy's file. And this was the first time the Cottage Garden Police Department really saw the full of the dark web hit on Amy, the first time they saw all of the messages between Daygod and the Mafia. So they got to walk and they located 10 other targets of a Mafia hits, and they reached out to the police departments from the areas in which they lived to see if there was any correlation or any leads that would come from that. being that Cottage Grove is a small police department. They had never had a case like this before. They'd never seen anything like it. They'd never dealt with the dark web. So they were really obsessing over this case. And one night, one of the detectives was lying in bed, and he decided to Google Dr. God. And that is when he found a user with that same account name had made to pass on Dream Market. And Dream Market is basically like a dark web eBay for illegal things. This detective immediately sends a text to Detective McAllister, who gets up immediately, gets tore up on his laptop, and he gets on Dream Marketplace to look up these posts from Dr. God. The first post said that they were looking for a drug dealer and for somebody to help them with a job, and they needed to be willing to accept Bitcoin. There were no responses to that post. The second person was asking if anybody sold scopolamine. Now, scopolamine is a prescription drug used to treat motion sickness, and its side effects include dizziness, drowsiness, and a dry mouth. I don't know if any of that sounds familiar to you guys. It is also said to induce amnesia. It's said to make people very pliable and very susceptible to suggestion, which is why it earned the nickname Devil's Breath. Now, a post by Dr. God requesting scopolamine had responses from other users. The fast response said, quote, "There is a sellout, but avoid that shit, mean it's dangerous and you will kill someone." Another user responded, quote, "Be careful, that shit will make you gladly hand over your kidneys and have no idea where, why, or who to when you come back to reality." After reading this, Detective McAllister contacted the medical examiner to have Amy tested for traces of scopolamine in her system, and this test came back positive for 40 times the therapeutic dose for motion sickness. This amount of scopolamine would have made her extremely dizzy, drowsy. It would have made her vision blurry, and she might have even been hallucinating the activity from her phone from just before her death. Shows just how much this drug was affecting her. At 1:48 p.m., she went on the Wikipedia page for vertigo. At 1:49 p.m., she tied the letters D-U-Y into being, and then a minute later she typed E-Y-E for I. She then typed in another search of DIY, VW, HGH, all in capitals. It seemed like she was desperate to figure out why she was feeling the way that she was. But she couldn't even make a simple search online. She couldn't even spell correctly. It was that bad. So at this point, police know that this is not a suicide. There was no doubt now that Amy was married. Now, like I said, Cottage Grove Police Department was a small department matters. A matter for hire was not existent. They didn't deal with things like Bitcoin and the dark web, so they decided to go through the existing cases to see if there were any potentially related records. And as it turns out, there is one. In March of 2016, a man had come in to report that he had been defrauded in a Bitcoin transaction. He had paid a man known only as Marcus $6,000 in Bitcoin for test prep materials. The materials were never delivered, and he then realized that Mark had used an untraceable disposable email to confirm the transaction, so he wasn't able to get in contact with him. Now, this report actually came at around the same time that Dog Day paid Beth a Mafia $6,000 for the hit on Amy. At that time, there really wasn't anything police could do, so they filed the report away without any further investigation. But when McAllister pulled this report out to see if it held any clues, he realized that the person who had made this report was none other than Stephen Online. So at this point, Stephen shoots up on police's radar, and he has now their number one suspect. So they get a warrant to seize all of his electronic devices. They seize 66 electronic devices, including phones, laptops, computers, hard drives, because Stephen works in it. They know that he knows how to hide his tracks on the internet. He knows how to hide emails. He knows how to hide internet activities that he doesn't want people to see. So 5 detectives are assigned to work almost full-time, going through his electronics, going through his phone, his apps, his text messages, his emails, his internet activity, everything. First of all, they found that he was definitely having more fat than the one he admitted to with Michelle. He often visited sites like Naughty Date Scum and Lonely MILF Stockholm. He found a sex worker on a website called Backpage, and he drove to Iowa to have sex with her twice, which cost $400 for an overnight. And that was years before his affair with Michelle started on his phone. They also found 2 apps, or Bot and/or Fox. And these apps are used to access Tor, the browser used to access the dark web. The dark web that Stephen claimed he had never even heard of until the FBI showed up at his door. They found that he had made searches for a system called Thales, which is basically a system that hides the use of Tor and activity on the dark web. He had also made a Google search of how to install Thales on an assault computer, which led detectives to realize that in all of the 66 electronic devices that they had seized from him, an Acer computer was not among them. As they looked further into Stephen, such as they noticed that he looked up Bitcoin on multiple occasions, as well as Bitcoin exchanges. They also found text message cards from a place called Local Bitcoin Trials. On the 16th of February, just minutes before dark day, God suggested BSA Mafia carry out the hit on Amy in Moline, Illinois. Stephen Googled Moline, Ill. On his laptop, he Googled K9 Nosework and reviewed an online event calendar for the upcoming trials. He then used Google Maps to calculate the distance from Chicago to Moline, and this was the exact information that was sent to the Mafia. The next day, on the same laptop, Stephen looked up Amy's life insurance policy, which was a $700,000 life insurance policy in which he was the sole beneficiary. In July, shortly before Amy received those threatening emails from Jane, which included her family's addresses, which had been found on a website called Radar, as specified in the emails. Stephen had actually visited the Radar's pages for Amy's family members, and what they didn't find was any evidence of a transaction for test prep materials with a man named Mark. Stephen supplied one single email to the police when he made the report about the fraudulent transaction, but there were no back-and-forth emails, as you might expect, with a $6,000 transaction. In fact, a single email from Mark had come from a disposable address, and as it turned out, Stephen had access to that same disposable address at the time, the exact time the email was sent. The big surprise, Mark isn't real, and police theorized that Stephen had actually gone and made this report about the fraudulent transaction to cover his tracks in case they ever found out that he was dealing with Bitcoin. Now, the real smoking gun in this case came from an actual backup of Stephen's iPhone. In August of 2016, he backed his iPhone up to iTunes, not realizing that this would preserve all of the evidence from this backup to the cloud. It showed that he created a note on his phone with a string of 34 random letters and numbers. 23 seconds later, this string of random letters and numbers was sent by Dog Day God to the Mafia. It was his Bitcoin wallet that was sent to prove that he had paid the Bitcoin for Amy's hit. A minute after the note was created, it was deleted, but not before it was backed up to the cloud. It showed that he created a note on his phone with a string of 34 random letters and numbers. 23 seconds later, this string of random letters and numbers was sent by Dog Day God to the Mafia. It was his Bitcoin wallet that was sent to prove that he had paid the Bitcoin for Amy's hit. A minute after the note was created, it was deleted, but not before it was backed up to the cloud. The reason that this was such a smoking gun is because a Bitcoin wallet is a unique, so this definitively connected dog that God and Stephen all win it, proved that Stephen had paid to have his wife killed, and when that didn't work out, he likely killed her himself. More and more evidence started coming in to prove this as well. Stephen claimed that he'd been working all day on the day of the murder by both companies that he worked for, said that he hadn't logged into their systems. After noon that day, the cameras from the Allwine house also confirmed that nobody came to the house or left the house from the time that Stephen left the house until he returned home and discovered his wife's dead body. They got in contact with Michelle Woodard as well, the woman that Stephen admitted to having an affair with. She confirmed the affair, and she also gave them more details about that time in March. They met up for Stephen's birthday, and he was late because he had locked his keys in his car while he was doing a Bitcoin transaction or Bitcoin trade in a Wendy's car park. They tracked down the call made to roadside assistance from the Wendy's, and they also used the confirmation cards to his local Bitcoins account to confirm all of this. When they reviewed the 911 call that Stephen made after discovering his wife's dead body, they found something really, really strange. So in the background of this call, you can hear 9-year-old Joe throughout the whole thing, right? And at one point, you can hear him say in the background, "This is 9-year-old Chaz, who just discovered his mom's dead body." You can hear him say in the background, "Are you going to remarry?" And Stephen kind of chuckles and says, "I don't know." But I mean, kids really do say the darndest things. But that comment from a 9-year-old child really has to make you wonder what he's been hearing at home, what he's been hearing his dad say, because Guy is not normal. That is not a normal response for a 9-year-old child who just found his mother in a pool of blood. So on the 20th of January 2017, Stephen had just dropped Joe off at school, and he was on his way home to Amy's parents' house because they were still living there at the time, and he was stopped in a routine traffic stop. When he was stopped, he was arrested and charged with the second-degree murder of his wife Amy O'Brien, which was really interesting charge, by the way, considering second-degree murder doesn't involve premeditation. And this was clearly premeditated, like a year in advance. His bail was set at $500,000, which he paid it pretty quickly. He was required to wear a GPS monitor and was only allowed supervised visits with his son, who was still staying at Amy's parents' house. So Stephen went back to the house that he and Amy had shot at 110th Street. He was arrested 2 weeks later for attempting to contact Joe, even though he was only allowed supervised visits and contact with him. His bail was set at $600,000, which again, he paid pretty quickly. This time he was not allowed to have any contact with his son. On the 24th of March 2017, a grand jury raised his charge from second-degree murder to first-degree murder, and bail was set at $1 million, which Stephen was unable to pay, and so he was remanded in custody awaiting trial. His trial took place in January of 2018, and he pled not guilty. The prosecution argued that his motive for the murder was that he didn't want to divorce Amy, because, you guessed it, it was against his religion. This is a phrase that I think just comes up way too much in true crime, and so many of the videos I've done. People are muttering because they don't want to get a divorce because it's against their religion. And every time I hear this phrase, I can't help but thinking, divorce is against her religion, but murder is, and God at the United Church of God is strictly against divorce. And really, I just feel like some of these churches need to start accepting divorce, not to tell you how to do your religion or anything, but it just seems like this little rule here that's causing a lot of matters. I can't even count on two hands how many cases I have done on this channel where a man murders his spouse because it's against his religion to get a divorce, which is wild. But the United Church of God is strictly against divorce. So if Stephen were to start divorce proceedings, they likely would have asked him to leave the congregation altogether. The prosecution argued that Stephen likely poisoned Amy with scopolamine at lunch, and when that didn't kill her, he contacted her father Charles to come and pick their son Joe up to get him out of the house, at which point he shot and killed Amy in the hallway while she was disorientated by the drug. He then hurried back to her body into the bedroom, cleaned up the blood in the hallway, staged the scene, and then burned the cleaning equipment and the clothes that he had been wearing during the attack in the fireplace. At this point, he then went and picked up his son. He got gas on the way. He stopped a couple who was on the way home for dinner, kept the receipts for both of these so that he had an alibi. He then got home and let his son go in first to be the one to discover his mother's dead body. They gave evidence that Stephen had tested positive for gunshot residue on his right hand. His socked feet also matched the bloody footprints found at the scene of the crime. After an 8-day trial, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Stephen Allwine guilty of first-degree murder. His sentencing hearing took place on the 2nd of February, and this was the first time that Stephen actually spoke. He didn't speak at all during his trial. He just kind of sat there and pretended to cry sometimes, but not a single tear came from his eyes. And the little box of tissues that they had in front of him was completely untouched the entire time. But during his little speech at sentencing hearing, he maintained his innocence, he maintained his love for Amy, and he said that he was bringing the word of God to drug addicts, child molesters, murder, and the like in prison, and had already converted 3 atheists so far. In the end, he was sentenced to a mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole following his sentence. The United Church of God put out a statement expressing concern for the bad press they were getting. It was a long statement that really didn't say a lot, and Bailey mentioned Amy to everybody than Amy. And Stephen was completely blindsided by this whole situation. Friends, family, colleagues, people from the church, nobody could believe it from the outside. They were the perfect couple. They were a loving and affectionate couple. They had a lot of love for each other, for their son. They were both doing well in their careers. They were both well respected in that community and in that congregation. And I mean, imagine Amy's parents as well. They'd actually let him live with them, their daughter's murder. I was living with them for months because they felt bad, because there was no way that he was responsible. They felt terrible for him because he had just lost his wife. They didn't want him to live in the house where he had lost his wife and Joe, to live in the house where he had lost his mother as a result of the 48 hours investigation into Amy's case, for more people have been arrested for murder for hire after using the same site, the mafia that Stephen had used. But that's everything to this case. Please let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments, because this one was crazy. And what's really sad about it as well is the fact that Stephen was so cunning that despite the fact that they had known that somebody was trying to kill her for months, they weren't able to prevent it. So not only was she murdered, but she was basically tortured for the last few months of her life. She was living in fear, knowing that somebody wanted to have her murdered, and the FBI and the police couldn't stop it. They couldn't find out who wanted her dead, and all along it was her husband who was living with her and doing everything with her, and she was none the wiser. At one point, she never suspected her husband, which really goes to show just how conniving and cunning Stephen was. And the worst part as well is the fact that he knowingly sent his 9-year-old son in to discover his mother's body. That is messed up. He orchestrated his 9-year-old son to find her body. I mean, I cannot get over that. And he was really smart with it. I gotta say, I like the way that he was writing these emails. That's the reason that nobody suspected him. He covered his tracks well for a while. Thank God they were able to, he just wasn't smart enough. Anyway, that's all for this case today. I look forward to chatting with you guys in the comments about this one, because I know you're going to have a lot to say about this one. But that's everything